Hello YouTube, I'm Jerry Kirkpatrick, and the last video I made, saw handle repair. I appreciate all of your questions, everybody that made a comment on that one, and it gave me the impetus to go back and look at it. When I did, I noticed that there were several areas that could use some clarification, and there were some other areas that I just basically took issue with. So if you haven't watched that particular video, saw handle repair, I would suggest going back and looking at that, and this video will probably make a lot more sense to you. The very first thing that I noticed in that video, after looking at it a couple of times after these comments, was one, the focus issue. So I spent a couple of days and learned how to hook up my tablet to the camera. So I can, now I have a monitor that I can keep close at hand. And the neat thing about this is it has a magnetic base. So whenever I'm working around anything metallic, I can place this monitor right where I'm working. If I'm not around a metallic area, like here at the table, I made this little triangle piece out of a piece of sheet metal, put three very cute little feetses on it, so I can stick this on there, place the monitor where I can see it, and I can actually change the focus to, now I'm focusing on that aluminum piece over there. Doink. Yeah, there we go. Now I'll put it back on my face. Come on. There you go. So anyhow, the one thing I didn't like about hooking up my tablet to the camera is I had to actually read the instructions, and that's just not like me. So anyhow, there you go. Hopefully I'll be able to keep my video in focus a little bit better now. Now that we've got the focus issue handled, let's get into the meat of this video. The first thing was when I was drilling the end of the handle, I had a center drill, the drill itself, and then a couple of taps. One thing that you may not have noticed was all of those items were stuck on a magnet on top of the tailstock. I also had the tap handle stuck on the side of the tailstock with a magnet. That allowed me to get all of the tools that I was going to use for that operation right there at hand. I didn't have to take one out, set the center drill somewhere, go find the drill. When I finished that, you know, everything was right at hand. So that might be something that you would want to keep in mind when you're going to be doing any operation that has 3 or 4 steps to it. get all of your tools together and placed in a handy location. Another thing that you may not have picked up on was that when I started to center drill the piece, I tapped at it about 3 times. And the reason for that was the center, the cross section, the web of a center drill is very narrow. And it will have a tendency to do away with any little tit that might be sticking out of the workpiece. If you part or face a piece on the lathe, if you don't have your tool dead on center, there is going to be a small tit left in the center. If you use the drill, the first drill that you're going to be using, it has a very broad web on it, and it will have a tendency to search. Plus, it's obviously much longer than a center drill. This is chucked up pretty tight, and it doesn't have much chance to wobble around. When you chuck up a drill, this may have a tendency to go outside of that little tit. So by using the center drill, just touch it a few times and erase the little tit that's on there. Then you can start drilling. Now that takes care of an outie. Let's talk about an innie, meaning center punch. The only square center punch that I use is for staking. If I want to put a detent spring retainer in, then I'll put that in and then stake around the hole to collapse it somewhat so that screw can't come out. The next time you go out to center punch a part that you're going to be making, you have your nice crosshatch where your hole is supposed to be. Take a look at your center punch and make sure that the center of the punch is straight down through the axis of the punch. And I only use either a hexagon or round punch that will fit into my drill. That way I can chuck it up, put it on the belt sander and turn the drill on, and very lightly touch the center punch and make sure that the concentricity is maintained through the full length. And let me show you why that is important. If this is the piece you're center punching, it's going to have a little rise to it, and then the center punch, it'll look like that. There's the center line. If you have a punch and it's drilled off or sharpened off like this, then the center of this is no longer going to be where that crosshatch is. It's going to be over here somewhere, because the side, depending on its rotation, the side that is longer is going to have less resistance. This one is pretty blunt, and it's going to move that center punch over. The next thing is the size of the web that will be started in the center punch has to be smaller than your center punch mark. If you have your center punch is somewhat like that, but your drill has the taper, and then it has the web and the taper there. If the width of the web is broader than the width of your center punch, you're not going to be on center. So make sure that your center punch the outside of these two areas here are well outside that web. So that might help you keep your holes where you want them put. The next thing that wasn't shown very clearly was, as I was drilling for the 1032 tap, I would drill in an amount, whatever that is, and then instead of unscrewing the drill out of the hole, I left it where it was. I loosened the tailstock lock, pulled the piece back, the drill, cleaned it off, re-oiled it, and then pushed that whole assembly back in until it bottomed, and then tightened up the handle on the tailstock, and then continued to drill. There's a lot of time wasted backing a drill out and then having to go all the way back in until you start drilling again. So drill until you need to clear the drill or re-oil, and loosen the tailstock, slide it out, clean it, oil it, slide it back in. The next thing was when I was tapping the hole, I tightened the tap up just a little bit, and that should have been just a little bit tighter. Being a 1032, I was afraid that if it was too tight and it did grab, even though I had the machine turned off when I introduced it, if it was just a little bit tighter, I could have tapped in farther. I like to go in, if I can get it adjusted just right, so it will pick up probably the second or third good thread past the taper of a starting tap. What you saw in the video with the tap being not tight enough, it actually spun and slid into the chuck. If I do a larger diameter, say a 5/16, even a quarter, 5/16, 3/8 tap, you can tighten that down pretty good. With a blind hole, you have to be fairly careful that you don't pull it in until it hits the bottom of the hole. With a through hole, you can shove it right in there and let it go almost all the way up to the end of the tap on a larger size, 1/4 inch, 3/8 easily. So if I do a tapping operation on the lathe again, I'll spend a little bit more time with that. Trying to get it adjusted just right it takes a long time for that feel, and I got it wrong. So I'll approach that at a later date. Also, while we're talking about tapping, you may not have noticed that when I was finishing the bottoming tap, the second tap that I used, that instead of turning the tap handle and then going and chasing it, I would turn it to a certain degree. I had my chuck handle in the chuck. I would let go, pull the chuck handle down to where the tap handle was right in the right location, and then I could turn it again. So I wasn't wasting time trying to find the tap handle. I used the chuck handle to reposition the tap handle. In the last video, it may not have been as clear as I would have wished that what the purpose for the tape on the piece was for. It was to get the length from the end of the threads to where the center punch mark needed to be. The purpose for the tape itself was so I could hold underneath the vise and position the piece where I wanted it. And I think I didn't say that the purpose for the tape was to gain a little bit of width. So this is this transfer punch is the same diameter as the piece that I was punching. You'll also notice that when I center punched the piece, it went down slightly. I could have simply placed a bolt on the opposite side of the vise, brought the piece down in where I wanted it, tighten the vise up, and by using this, it won't allow the jaws to rack. Without the spacer on this side, it'll pivot on the bolt and the jaws will loosen up on this side. Okay, so for the last part in this video it was mentioned that it would be very hard to grind a drill as small as I use, that 5/64 drill, to put that pin through. Well, I've been grinding drills by hand since 1959. I was taught by an old German machinist named Schweitzer when I worked at Kellogg Engineering in Venice, California. One of the main things I did was drill holes in thousands of little parts, and he got tired of me running to him both to sharpen the drill and then put it back in the machine and get it set to depth. So I did that a long time ago. The main thing is my grinder. It's a very fine wheel on this side, coarse on this side. I have a tool post, a tool bit grinder with a diamond wheel on the far side. This one is for high-speed steel. I have a green wheel on the back side for doing carbide bits, wire brush, polishing. Excuse me. I also keep my drill gauge on a couple of magnets right on top, so it's always there. I have a magnifying glass with a halo type fluorescent bulb in it, so I can get right down. I have a magnifying set that I can put on, and it has 2 adjustments, so I can get right down to some very fine work. On a drill as small as the one I use, usually from like a 1/16 on down, I'll get an initial angle and rake on this, and then I go to my very fine diamond wheel, and that's about it. In order to grind drills, you have to know what the material is to grind them properly for each type: stainless, aluminum, copper, brass. It just takes a long time to learn that kind of stuff. So I appreciate you watching. Please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you later.